Hello, and thank you for joining us on Vermont Film Essentials. My name is David Metzger.
I'm Devon Ewell.
Alex Lavin.
Joining us again, special guest for the Coen Brothers, FARGO. I don't know about you guys, but I've been excited all week. Like, this is just
one of my favorites.
We don't have enough snow around here.
Right.
I'm interested in, first you were saying that you spoke with your friend who is from Minnesota because you wanted to get their perspective.
I think it's one of those movies like Do the Right Thing, like Better Luck Tomorrow, that looks at such a specific subculture in America that is constructed, however conscientiously, as an other within our own realm, that there's been some pushback. And people are like, Minnesotans aren't like that. I've never been to Minnesota, so shoot, I don't know. I've been lucky enough to cross paths and make friends with some northern Midwesterners, but I could only think of one person I knew for sure that was from Minnesota. And that was my old homie from Think Coffee in New York on Bleecker Street, who knows a thing or two about survival, a big Coen Brothers theme, because he manages a coffee shop in New York City. And if you can survive in New York managing a coffee shop, you can do anything. As a bonus, he is an astute scholar of movies, and we bonded when I was working there, 10 years ago now, with him, and I immediately thought to reach out to him and just be like, hey man, can you give me notes as a Minnesotan? And he's like, hey, thanks for reaching out. So I'm just gonna I'm not gonna paraphrase, I'm gonna give you the 100 words he sent me.
Cool.
I guess for me, this is Dylan talking. I guess for me, I loved the way they explored the positive and negative extremes of Minnesota nice. Frances McDormand, that's the sheriff, Marge, Gunderson?
Gunderson.
Marge, and her husband, Norm, embody the positive extreme, stoic yet sweet, honest, loyal, and hardworking. They face serious hardship and tragedy with an aw shucks, you betcha attitude and look out for others. William H. Macy inhabits the negative role, passive-aggressive, petty, and aspiring to a superficial ideal with a strained smile. The way he keeps doubling down on his lies, getting himself into more and more trouble just to avoid the truth, and disappointing and or making folks uncomfortable is a very nasty Minnesota trait. Additionally, Dylan says, I love how the extreme winter weather brings Frances closer to the one she cares about. She and her husband in bed, last scene, while it alienates and frustrates William and his plans. Another unforgettable scene after he gets denied the 750 large. Woo! Last little thing. There's at least one shot where you can see old Dutch dill pickle potato chips. Can't remember which off the top of my head. They're made in Minnesota and seriously so addictive and good. I eat 2 to 3 family-sized bags by myself whenever I'm home. Warmed my heart to see the Coen snuck it in. And he says, nothing too revelatory here, but I hope it helps. It helped a bunch, and there are real revelations. So that's a story about that.
That's great. Nice.
I didn't know that that's a real character in Minnesota. Is the Bill Macy character?
I didn't know that.
I mean, did you guys watch it this week? Or?
Oh yes, yeah.
What was different this time?
I guess I think it's only really the second full time I've seen it, because other times have been when it was on a movie channel and I happened upon it in mid-scene. And just the appreciation for how tightly constructed it is. I mean, just purely on an editing level, and they edited the film. So it's so astonishingly well put together, and the screenplay. Both those things, just how the editing and the screenplay were jumped out. Just why it's so perfect, because I do think it's one of the best 50 films ever made, and that's
you stole all my insights.
I did watch it this week, and kind of like what you were saying before, it's it's one of those once a year type movies where, especially during the winters of Vermont, it's like, okay, we got to watch The Shining and we got to watch Fargo.
Funny that those are the two films we've
that
spoken
we
about.
did. I didn't really. But I was trying to think back because I wanted to say that this was my first introduction to the Coen Brothers, but then I started thinking, well, maybe it was Raising Arizona.
That was mine.
But you didn't know it was a Coen Brothers movie.
No. It was just like, I remember like 1996. I just remember it being in the air that it was one of those movies where everyone seemed to be talking about it. Especially like, this was like at the time when it just newly came out on VHS. And it was like, have you rented Fargo yet? Have you got Fargo yet? So we rented it and we watched it. And I remember just being affected by I loved that it was the way the people talked, the way the language of the film, and it reminded me of it's like I'm not watching like constructed characters. I'm watching people existing, in the similar ways like why I loved at such a young age why I loved watching Seinfeld. Because it was just, for something about it, it was just like, oh, this is the way people actually talk.
Right.
And I think the scene, one of the many great scenes in this movie, but the scene between Marge and William H. Macy when, he's fleeing the interview. He's fleeing the interview.
Such a great line.
But just the way he's like, well, heck, you want to play games? I'm working with you on this one. And then he goes off, and as he's walking away, he's just like, what the Christ. Yeah, and it's just the brilliance of how people talk in a situation. Even like the like throwaway scenes of just the two people who are like these guys. It's always the same. It's always more.
Yeah.
And my mom and I just sitting there and just laughing at that and not expecting to laugh at something like that.
That guy's got 90 seconds of screen time. It's more memorable than most of Mark Wahlberg's performances, let's be honest.
That's the second dig at Mark Wahlberg in this
It's funny
season.
because
my fault.
It's funny because watching Frontier last night, I at one point I said, Mark Wahlberg could have been in this.
Big Mark Wahlberg fan.
But anyway.
Don't come at me, dog. If I see you on the street in New York, we were hey man, we were pulling for you since Boogie Nights. Don't you forget it.
I really think as far as the screenplay goes and the memorable nature of the lines, where it's not just what's being said, it's how it's being said. And there's so many lines of Frances McDormand's that I think of because of how they're said. It's like when it says, he goes, you see something on there, Chief? And then she goes, no, I think I'm just going to barf. And it's just like the way it's said, and I don't know, just really... The Radisson line. Well, it's the Radisson, so it's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's this logic. It's this like Minnesotan, and it's mythology unless you really know. And like you said, but the thing is, you prefaced with your friend's kind of assessment, and it really does seem like they've mined all those Minnesotan qualities.
I think the story of Frances McDormand's contributions to the cinema really has yet to be written, because there was something that a lot of actors who are female, we hesitate to call them actresses because we don't call pilotstresses, it's one of those like gendered terms that we're trying to like get around now or whatever. But female actors had to really find a way to inject a certain amount of sovereignty into these roles that were underwritten for so long, whether it was a Shelley Duvall or whether it was a Deborah Winger or Teresa Russell or Sally Field was an early leader of the pack in terms of really coming with some real chops and not just being this second fiddle kind of thing. And the way that she is, even when thinks she's gonna barf, she is in control of that scene. Yeah. And when she walks into the police station, she is in complete control, quietly in command, but unmistakably so.
Right. Yeah, the way she sets Mike straight. When she's like, no, you can sit over there. I think that's what, it's just, and she's even like gracious about preserving his dignity. When afterwards she says, no, I just don't want to, turn my neck. Like, it's like.
Yeah. Or even like, not sure I agree 100% on your police work there, Lou.
That's one of the best parts of the movie. It's incredible.
That made it into the trailer. Not only did I watch the movie, but I had to watch the trailer.
This is the thing. How do they balance humor and dark subject matter so beautifully that Three Billboards tries to, you know what I mean? Not that Three Billboards wasn't, I couldn't help but think of it a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, some stuff that was done clumsily in that movie was done effortlessly here. So what is being done that is not being done there that I started to question?
I don't know. They just got the mix right, and I think, there's a lot of movies we can choose. They've made a lot of great movies. I really do think this is their best film.
We used to.
I know. There's so
we
many.
used to get into fisticuffs over this versus Lebowski because all my, quoting Lebowski.
Well, and there's a lot
endlessly.
that are near to my heart too, like Miller's Crossing and Barton Fink that made me fall in love with cinema. So it really is hard, but you have to put this on a pedestal of sorts because of its construction, I think.
And what's so amazing
editing.
about it too is that, like I said, when this came out in 1996, it's like they had been working for so long, but somehow their movies, while critically acclaimed as some of them weren't really audience films. You felt like they were more like filmmakers than an audience favorite. So however you classify that or put stock in that. With this film, it was like not only did they strike the right tone and find the right mix, but it came out and it was like not only are the critics raving about this, but audiences found it.
My dad loves this movie.
Yeah.
My dad loves Jerry Lundegaard as a character. And
it's
if
great.
my dad likes your movie, you're onto something.
Well,
all right?
And then finding out about William H. Macy and how much he fought for the role is amazing too. There's a quote that says, he goes, well, they were still auditioning in New York, so I got my jolly Lutheran ass on an airplane and I made it there. And then he says the exact quote that he said to them, which is I didn't want you guys to make a huge mistake, or I didn't want you to screw up the film by not having me in it. And he's like, that's a big gamble saying that. And he goes, that's not always going to work out for an actor, but I said the role is mine.
And they complimented him right back, right? Where they said that he was somebody who was willing to take ownership of this loser, this conniver, this really, and Bill Macy says he's really kind of a nasty guy underneath the caricature
But those are the best. Those are the
it.
best characters, and that's why I wince anytime just a fellow actor says, "I don't know, I don't think that I wouldn't really like." And then they start describing those judgments of the character. It's like, no, that's the good stuff. You got to go for it, explore that stuff because that's the stuff we all ignore and act like isn't there in all of us.
I mean, if I could just chime in with what my reading of why is this so well balanced when other films like The Hudsucker Proxy, The Lady Killers, Burn After Reading, and I'm sure we could pluck an...
Burn After Reading is like Inherent Vice to me because it's like with PTA because it's like I actually really enjoy a lot of it.
Intolerable Cruelty, too much in the realm of kitsch, and it begins to become tiresome a little bit.
I was rooting for it, but it ultimately kind of failed.
Yeah, they're kind of the kitsch aspect of it ends up kind of flattening out the dramatic dynamics of the film, and so they're coming off their only big Hollywood film. And for context, this is '94 when they went from Barton Fink, which won the Golden Palm at the Cannes Film Festival.
I didn't know that. I love that movie.
Much greater success than any filmmaker would ever dream of. But for the Coens, they're Hollywood guys, and they want to make it in Hollywood. So they cast Paul Newman and Tim Robbins. Tim Robbins is having a great year, all this stuff. Everybody's having a great year. Jennifer Jason Leigh, serious actors in a big, expensive movie. And it goes so far off the deep end in the realm of kitsch that it just falls on its nose. And I know this because Roger Deakins, who provides a really insightful commentary track on the Fargo DVD and Blu-ray, is like, God, we were trying to do anything to get away from the missteps of Hudsucker Proxy.
Wow.
And so that's why they bring in some of that surrealism and some of that grotesquerie that are familiar from Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing, and Barton Fink. But it doesn't have this kind of self-regarding, look at how familiar we are with mid-century American culture. It has this really lived-in kind of thing where, yeah, she dropped, like it's this thing where it's like, the tertiary character, never mind the secondary characters, but the tertiary characters in Fargo are more interesting than most filmmakers' secondary characters. And if anybody's ever taken a screenwriting class, then they tell you the quality of your script is only as good as your secondary characters.
It's almost Shakespearean, I was going to say, only because the side conversations, like the hitman conversations, remind me of certain Shakespearean scenes when it's two like guards talking.
Remind me, because I only ever pretended to read Shakespeare.
I guess I can't pinpoint. There's scenes in Hamlet when it's like the gravediggers talking, and it's like there's just these side scenes in which he's able to endow them with cleverness and wit and just like elevate them where they would just be these kind of throwaway scenes in other people's work. And it's the scene when he goes, man, you're a real I forget what Buscemi says, but he's basically like he goes, I mean, this is like what does he say? Like you're a fountain of conversation, a geyser. And it's actually when the cop gets shot, it's literally like a geyser of blood. And I remember, I'm like, wait a minute, like they totally like threw that out there as an image and made sure you heard it, fountain, geyser, like it was in a row. And,
so he does have a geyser, just not of words.
Right,
of violence.
Right.
There's also at the very beginning of the movie, there's this great moment where Steve Buscemi is actually trying to talk him out of doing. It's like robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Right.
Like, I don't understand why you're doing this.
He questions the logic of the thing, and soundly.
Yeah. And then he's just like, fuck it, give me the.
The line when he goes, we've been waiting an hour. He's peed 3 times already. Like that line, he's peed 3 times already, lets you know how good the dialogue's going to be throughout the film.
Yeah.
There's a specificity to some of it that's not forced.
Yeah.
And it's the first time that appears in a Coen Brothers movie. As much as we love Blood Simple, Miller's Crossing, Raising Arizona, and Barton Fink, and Hudsucker, there is something kind of airless about those films before Fargo that it's too contrived, it's too deliberate. They have a little something in common with Kubrick in that they know exactly what's going to happen, and there's no room for anything else. They make room to hang out a little bit in Fargo, which is nice.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
And then speaking of the dialogue, so where's Pancake House?
Love it.
And Peter Stormare,
he's so good.
I guess he tells a story that when he said it, he said, does he say Pancake's house or Pancake House?
Yeah, no, he kills the plural, the improper plural.
Right.
But Ethan Coen, pulls him aside?
Yeah, and he's like, you're saying it wrong. And he's like, oh, I thought it was a mistake. And he's like, there's no mistakes in our script.
Yeah. That's what made me think of Kenneth Lonergan, because like Kenneth Lonergan's plays, like This Is Our Youth, they have the likes are all there for a reason, the ums are all there for a reason, nothing is left to chance, and they're all architected. And I kept thinking of that in this, of like, man, these lines are what makes them are those moments when Buscemi's like, yeah, don't make any noise, or, we're gonna kill you. Like, it's just like so, and that's what sells it is the and it's so they really take the time to your point of like making it an authentic experience, not just regionally, but human wise. I mean.
And this is all, you got to give the context for people out there who weren't there in '94, didn't give a damn in '94 and '96. Fargo's '96, but '94 is the one where they fell on their face with Hudsucker, and they're like, okay, we have to come up with something different. Pulp Fiction had just happened, and they said, hey, maybe we can get into Hollywood through the side door, because Hollywood was not accustomed to movies like Pulp Fiction having a staggering amount of cultural success. Even though if you look at the numbers, Pulp Fiction didn't make a ton of money, but it's the most quoted movie from the 90s or whatever. So there's that aspect to it, and there's this whole aspect where it's like they were finally ready to just shake off everything that they'd been carrying with them from the time when they started working with Sam Raimi on the Sam Raimi movies, and they co-wrote a movie called Crime Wave, which is so deliberately unapproachable that they're like, can we just make something that's can we just put our hearts in it a little bit, make it a little bit approachable? Is that okay?
I just want to say a thank you to Mark Covino, because if there's any reason why I saw the movie Crime Wave, it's because of him. He showed it to me.
That's awesome.
Classic Covino. Sup, Mark? It stands up. Okay, so, P.T. Anderson, Quentin Tarantino, these guys love to hang out, and, they can let a scene run on and on and on. Coens don't do that. They have enough rigor as filmmakers where there's the old screenwriting adage, come in late and get out early. So you got Marge just getting on the line. She's like, Detective Cyber, please. How that conversation's going to go just from her, the intonation of the way she asks for, the zeal of her character. And so, John Sayles is a great filmmaker, another regional filmmaker who really focused attention on this or that part of the country, kind of like the Coens did with Raising Arizona, Fargo, The Big Lebowski in LA, very regionally attenuated films, as with John Sayles. John Sayles is a great thing. It's like, if I don't know where your movie's going in the first 25 minutes, you don't know where your movie's going in the first 25 minutes. And if you go back and watch Fargo, you know exactly where it's going in the first 11 minutes. You know every major character, and you know how you almost have this kind of, oh God, this is not going to end well, is it?
I marvel every time I pull it off the shelf. I look at it because it's like I marvel at the fact that this movie is 96 minutes. A brisk 96 minutes. This movie does in 96 minutes what movies that are like 2.5 hours can.
And it's basically because of what you said, which is making sure, cutting away all the fat so that you only leave the essential, because they balance plot development with banter so beautifully that it can have a life of its own and feel like the directors you were talking about. I think of Cassavetes just because that was like the one that really brought me down the rabbit hole of like exploring what you can do in a scene, acting-wise and writing-wise, and like. Yeah,
that guy needed an editor, huh?
True, but I do enjoy the real moments in his films, as imperfect as some of them might be, and it's like they show what you can do if you really truncate it down to like a Kubrickian kind of like shape of just like controlling every aspect.
Totally.
As we keep going back to the movie, the one thing that stands out to me, as much as everyone is great in this movie, as much as I love hearing some of the dialogue, and especially some of those scenes where it's just like mundane, ordinary stuff, but somehow they find poetry in them. We were talking about like the scene where he's not going to finish his dinner. He's going to go to McDonald's. I mean, it's just this little moment that just like it explodes with just color and beauty and life. But Frances McDormand as Marge Gunderson is the one thing that every time I watch it just sticks out to me, because of all the films, you think about the early 90s and the 90s in general, is like this big flourish of crime films. And how many of them, usually you're watching a character like a William H. Macy lose his moral compass. You're watching these people flirt with crime. How many movies do you actually sympathize and find yourself rooting for the police officer?
Right.
And not, just because she is the law.
That's interesting.
It's because she's a great person. And I always get I remember having a conversation with someone and I was saying, really talking about this is a feminist film, and trying not to step over the boundaries because, I'm not a female and I don't want to speak for them, but it's like, this truly is one of the feminist films. And she was saying well, it's just a man's film with the female in it, in the male character's role. And I think that's really downplaying her character, because all throughout the movie, like her femininity is given like full color, that she's pregnant, that she has to deal. Not only is she pregnant, but she does her job. Yep. She does it well. She doesn't use it as an excuse for anything. And at the end of the film, like her monologue at the end of the film when she's in the car, I mean, it's tear-inducing.
Yep.
It's the best film, and it's the best scene in any Coen Brothers film, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of, it's the eye of the storm, you might say, in their entire career, which is they are about something. They refuse to admit that their movies are about anything, which is great for us because we get to come in with whatever we want to say. But they are about something, and we've got all these books about the Coen Brothers. Anybody who wants to do a deep dive on stuff, I don't want to get too geeky with the books, but there's an Old Testament thread running through their films, and their films are often remarked as being the most Jewish films about non-Jewish characters. Only, what was it? A Serious Man is the one that really
Which
flirts.
I really enjoyed, actually. I think it's a great film.
Maybe a little too serious, but whatever.
But, yeah. I was going to say about McDormand is the fact that she is the takeaway of this film is that, in such a great film, is that the crazy thing about it is that she only appears 34 minutes into a 96-minute film. I kept track. I was like, she's not in it yet. She's not in it yet. Like, how long does it actually? I loved the fact that the final image that you're left with as a viewer is her and Norm's love for each other. That's the final. I mean, the way she makes him feel about it, he's like, no one much goes for the 3-cent stamp. She's like, yeah, but what? And then it's this beautiful, and it's been beautiful the whole time, but this is what you're left with in a film filled with brutality and greed and deplorable human qualities.
And of course, you notice that that's a perfect counterpoint because, we introduce her with the mallards and it's sleepy time, it's early morning and all that. And this has come right after probably the most horrific scene in the movie where not only do they shoot the cop who comes off as he's a figure of the law, figures of authority and justice often come off as unjust in Coen Brothers films because invariably they work for the big man who appears in virtually every Coen Brothers film and is here. It's Jerry's father-in-law is the big man, or it's the Big Lebowski, or it's this big guy or that big guy. There's always some big old rich guy who pulls the strings in the universe, and so law characters come off as kind of these saps who work for power, and so we don't feel too bad about the cop getting shot. We don't feel too bad about the doofy guy in the winter hat, in his puffy jacket. There's something kind of comically grotesque about it. But when Peter Stormare shoots a woman her humanity is expressed through her breathing, and she's upside down in the car, that's probably the most horrific, like nakedly horrific moment in any Coen Brothers film outside of, pardon me, No
Country for Old Men,
where they really, go all in on that. And so we go from the most nakedly horrific thing to the most tender thing in the movie. And it's that juggling of dynamics in a way that actually works. I mean, there would be a lot of ways to get that wrong that make this stronger than I think everything that's come before. I think Barton Fink wanted to do that really well, but it doesn't do it quite as well. They're gesturing toward that with Barton Fink, but they don't quite get it right the way they get it right here.
They made sure they never went off the rails with this one, with any kind of, even beloved quirks that appear in all these other films where they're just like, oh, that's that thing they do. But they didn't really do that in this, because even the one scene that you maybe could construe as being just there for no reason ends up justifying itself plot-wise, which is when Mike meets her, and you think this is such an interesting scene, and it's just this kind of but then it's what gives her the idea that maybe Jerry's lying. When she finds out that Mike was lying, it's part of a mystery. It's like, it's so well...
That's never told to the audience, but we know. We don't have to see her knowing it, because we know it.
It just pushed something in her brain, and it's like the reason you have that scene, even though it's a great scene, but it's more like what we talked about with the PTA type scenes of just these people, just this other thing that happens in, not part, but it's like the way they created this like Rubik's Cube, where you're like, no, it has a reason. And it turns the clock,
It begs the question, given that they refuse to acknowledge that their movies are about anything, and this movie seems to be going off in a number of directions, both tonally and, in terms of which character is the main character. It could be Marge, it could be Jerry, it could be the kidnappers. They get a lot of screen time, What is Fargo about?
I always go back to Frances McDormand, and I always go back to their scenes because it is it's one of the most beautiful representations of a marriage in film.
I agree.
And I think no matter how, they would explore this even more in No Country for Old Men, but I still think this film is better than that. Because no matter how gone to shit this world will become, nothing will overcome that goodness that you can have in your heart and soul. You know, it's why it's so emotional when she says, "I just don't understand." You know, all for just a little bit of money.
And she said it's a beautiful day too.
Yeah.
And just the way
It's so not
the
beautiful day.
Right. But it's just something about the way she says the line that's like not forced or and nothing really comes across as they're trying to do anything with the screenplay, and it's beautifully executed.
It is quietly feminist because no male character in any Coen Brothers film is accorded that kind of sovereignty and moral groundedness. They're all cads. They're like worse than Paul Verhoeven characters. They're like, they're either disdainful of others like Walter and Lebowski, or they're completely self-serving and myopic like the dude, or they're completely vain like the other Jeffrey Lebowski. You know, there's not a winner amongst them, or they're complete doofuses like Nick Cage in Raising Arizona.
Brad Pitt and Burn After Reading too.
You know, everyone in this movie is selfish, and she's the one character, and you can make a Norm too, is that they're completely selfless. You know, like Norm waking up and saying, you know, I gotta make eggs.
Love it.
You gotta have a breakfast.
And she wants to be like, no, just sleep. And she that smile that she gives before she gets up, knowing just that, just appreciating their love, is really cool. And that those moments are allowed to happen in this film is like a testament to just its humanity amidst all of the whatever else they're doing. Like, you know.
Well, I think it is a movie it must be about something. Otherwise, we couldn't watch it every single year and get something new out of it. And Dave and I mentioned that we do watch it pretty regularly. It's like The Wire. It keeps on giving.
See, it's like Ghostbusters for me, where I watch it every year.
It does keep on giving. I think it's one of those movies that what it's about is so on the face of it, you almost miss it, where it's about isolation, you might say. And not just like my man Dylan wrote in that great message that he wrote. Thank you, Dylan. It's about the kind of social isolation that the nastiness of the weather, that is to say, the conditions in the United States of America, inculcate in people, where men are not allowed to be, fragile in any way. And if you have money problems, you can't explain that to your family. And, women are often asked to be servile in some sense and not asked to, bring their agency to fruition, to kind of keep their dreams tamped down within the context of the family. And that creates this very kind of cellular isolation. And the weather brings that about perfectly. And in fact, of every single snow movie you can think of.
With Do the Right Thing, it was the heat.
Exactly.
So
it is a film like Do the Right Thing, where the environment, it says everything to the point where you don't even have to articulate it in wonky words. You just feel it.
I mean, in the heat of the night, the AC is broken, and they make a point about it. I mean, I really think it's interesting that the climate of the movie can be like a double entendre.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there were filmmakers in the history of American cinema, but especially the history of European cinema, where it's like, we don't have a lot of money, so we're going to use what's around to enhance people's experience of this. And I hate to bring up somebody like Michelangelo Antonioni in the context of the Coens, because they would always eschew that self-seriousness that Antonioni brought to the table. But he was, along with David Lean and a few other filmmakers in the late 50s, early 60s, somebody who brought the whole confluence of the 7 arts into storytelling and character, where it really enhanced things. And Lawrence of Arabia is you can feel the heat, you can feel the desert. In Antonioni movies, you can feel that social dislocation, that isolation, and it's very much about the architecture. It's about the landscape. It's La Aventura couldn't happen without those islands, you know. And they get it right, and they continue to get it right, film after film after film.
It's not only a backdrop for the movie, but it's a psychological landscape that enhances the characters.
I think so. Yeah, honestly, it's not window dressing, and they're able to tie the Minnesota nice thing to the fact that you got to be nice to people because there's like nobody up here. You'd be like miles and miles and miles between houses, and Vermonters, that's not so, you know. That's not so alien a notion, I hope. Have any other famous filmmakers edited every single one of their own movies?
Robert Rodriguez did a lot of his, and he shot a lot of his too, which was like always impressive to me. Like
pretty much from the very beginning, he never let another editor touch his stuff.
Because I love Sin City. Like I know it's a very polarizing film, but I'm on the loving side of it, and like when I saw how many things he did in that, it was pretty impressive.
Yeah. Anybody?
I mean, other than that,
so they don't get that really superlative. Sorry, guys. Bob Rodriguez, right on track with you.
One of the things, because you mentioned that, so Frances McDormand doesn't come into the movie until about
like 34-minute mark.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why, because they're really tricky this way. But one of the films that I think is a good double bill with this, or at least I compare it to it, is Psycho, because that film too sets up this story that you think you're following one person, and then after the
I wonder when it happens.
It's that same time.
That happens, and they are like movie nerds like that, where they would do something like that. That's
and the switch happens with a death.
Oh my God!
The switch happens with a death. A death occurs, and one character comes in and takes over the entire movie.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they do they do a same thing a different way in No Country for Old Men, because everyone kind of was taken aback and scoffed at the fact and called it a mistake when Josh Brolin is killed in No Country for Old Men, and they're like, well, what the heck?
Screen.
But yeah, and really, like the guy we were following and he's like, no, but if you watch the movie again, who opens the movie? It's Tommy Lee Jones. This is Tommy Lee Jones's story, and they almost do the opposite with that film, in that they get to the end of the film and say, no, sleight of hand, we were following this guy the whole time.
Yep.
You just didn't know it. In this film, the same thing. It's just like, the whole time we think we're just watching these morally bankrupt people hash out this plan, but then someone else comes in.
It shifts tone with her too, and it really becomes like a different kind of film. Actually, have you seen Good Time with Robert Pattinson? Please see it.
By Safdie brothers.
Safdie brothers. Yeah. But it starts out and you feel like it's one film, and then something happens where it completely shifts tone and becomes another film, but not discordantly, and not one where you're like, wait, what? Like it just happens, and then you realize it, and you're like, oh, this is what's going on. And then the other part may come back in, but it's like it's gone off on a different course.
Well, few movies have ever set the genre in such a different direction as Psycho did with the horror thriller movie.
Absolutely.
But if I may, Fargo was the best, aside from Chinatown. We'll just get that caveat out there right now. But aside from Chinatown, Fargo was the best of what were called the neo-noir cycle of films. Most cycles of films, of course, happen over a pretty brief period of time. The gross-out comedies that came in the wake of Dumb and Dumber and American Pie, that was a pretty truncated period, and like we were all on board for it. We knew it was happening. We lined up for it. But neo-noir really started around the time of The Long Goodbye in Chinatown in 73, 74, and then by the time you get to Body Heat and Basic Instinct, a real template has been put in place where it's got to be like before in the 40s, where noir was a thing where the crime world invades the home.
Right.
The crime becomes domestic. A normal guy gets involved in crime, and all of a sudden we're sitting under the living room lampshade talking about how we're going to kill off your husband or whatever in Double Indemnity. And they said, okay, like that, but sexier, right? And the Coen Brothers were like, well, that was only part of noir, was the idea of the titillating aspect of the crime world. And so, in the wake of Basic Instinct, which pretty much nailed the neo-noir template as it had existed up until that time, they said, no, let's make it more domestic. And I think that they nailed it in that way. They didn't quite set neo-noir off in a new direction the way Psycho did, but they definitely said, like, no, it's about normal people, and it's not necessarily about the sexiness of crime.
And it's interesting because some people tried to revive that, like John Dahl with like Last Seduction and all the After
West?
Dark, My Sweet, or no, that was actually someone else, but no, After Dark was I misspoke, but yeah, like it's interesting with neo noir how many different kind of palettes and approaches it has, because there's more like kind of one purist wanting to keep it in that noir kind of tone, but then there are, thank God, there's movies like this that just
the weird thing is, Lebowski is so different from Fargo, and yet it's basically about a kidnapping gone wrong, or a kidnapping that's a fake kidnapping, essentially. They're both about fake kidnappings, and yet they couldn't be more different. And
I think because the first time when my friend and I watched The Big Lebowski, we were kind of taken aback and I didn't enjoy it the first time I watched it, only because it was coming off of this. And they were just so different, and it almost seemed like on the surface it was like, this is just a dumb, like, stoner comedy. Like, I don't know what they're, but thankfully the more you go back to Big Lebowski, the more there is there, and it's actually it's one of the greatest comedies of the past 30 years as far as I'm concerned. But
it's not 96 minutes.
No, it's not.
And it in that last half hour of the film, you feel the absence of the dramatic weight that is there in Fargo. And that was always my defense of Fargo. It was like, Big Lebowski's so great, we can quote it forever, and yet it's got this Chinese food feeling about it at the end of it, where you're like, that's it?
Yeah. And there is, like, same thing with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where, it's great until all of a sudden there's this 15, 20-minute chunk where you're like, what are we doing here? And then it comes back. But yeah, with this film, it's just like,
Well, and Man Who Wasn't There. I mean, you do have some really good films from different eras from them, but it's just there's something that doesn't put it in this category where it's not quite as precisely crafted.
I think that there's a trilogy there, however unconscious, amongst Fargo, The Man Who Wasn't There, and No Country for Old Men, in terms of people trying to make it big with some scheme, and it goes from a really unapproachable character like Jerry to an only somewhat, maybe kind of intermittently unapproachable character with Billy Bob Thornton in Man Who Wasn't There, and then a downright decent guy whom we're sorry to see go by the time we get to No Country for Old Men. You might say that they warm up to these dopes.
I mean, even in Barton Fink, you've got John Turturro's character with this sort of like moral like choice. And you're right there with him, and it's almost like you're asked to sit in judgment of how do you feel about what he's doing, of like his battle between wanting to write his own screenplay and having to like write that kind of picture, like another wrestling picture, and it's like really tough. You're right there with him.
But there is that moment every time in Barton Fink where John Goodman comes in, and it's just like he's trying to communicate with him, but he's just, you do not listen.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's the one moment where it's like, like you're so with him because he's got all these things that he wants to do. He's got all these lofty ideas, but when he wants to make the thing for the common man, but when the common man is right there in his room, he doesn't listen to.
Well, it's a brilliant joke about the writer that claims to be such a observer, and then is like not listening to the person talking to them on the train. Yeah. Totally, man.
How utterly bizarre it would come from filmmakers who themselves have had difficulty juggling the, let's say, more arcane preoccupations of their work with the humanity that is so beautifully on display in Fargo and often lacking in their less revered films.
How did you guys feel about Inside Llewyn Davis?
Hated it at first. Warmed up to it later.
Okay.
Yeah.
I liked it, but I had that same kind of reaction where at the end of it, I was like, you know, it doesn't leave you with a good feeling. Not that every movie should, but there was a moment at the end of it where I was like, I loved what I saw, but I don't know, kind of like the Chinese food thing where it's like, well, Christ, why did I just sit through that? But I feel like, kind of like with A Serious Man, you know, the more you go back to it,
I look
like
at those the same, to be honest.
I haven't made that connection yet. Tell me.
Well, no, just not necessarily for any overt reason, but more just the way they felt when I saw as their later films, where I was like, they had problems, but I really liked what they were essentially going for. Like, there was enough left on the screen that I felt was like, you know what, I actually really like this, as opposed to some of their more, where they really go for like a certain tone and it doesn't hit, or it like doesn't, where it's kind of threadbare. It doesn't have like those, there's not, you know, you get to the, I don't know, it's like really like, there's more left on the bone, to be honest. That's really how it feels. And like, with Inside Llewyn Davis, I felt like they really, I don't know, had this cool atmosphere of like this romanticized notion of New York City in that era, and I thought they captured it in a really uncontrived way, and like, I don't know, it had me. Like, sometimes it's like you're in it or you're not, and I was in it the whole time, and so it really caused me to not really like think about it in a critical sense, but I was so absorbed by its story and characters that I like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to Kubrick in the end, right? Okay, so Kubrick had that great line where he's like, characters aren't so interesting, situations are. And that's very Coen to me in terms of they don't really care about any of their characters, but the whole effect of what these characters amount to in terms of, you know, they're about America as much as any Spike Lee or Oliver Stone film. Just in the most... in the most sneaky way possible, and you can always tell what aspects of American culture draw them to a particular project, ever since that great opening monologue by what's his name in Blood Simple.
Is it Emmett Walsh?
Emmett Walsh. What I know about is Texas, and that can be said of all their films. Like, what they know about is Texas, by which we mean the United States of America. And so whether it's the old-timey music or the American traditional of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," or the scene in the village in the 60s that drew them to Inside Llewyn Davis, they're looking for narrative and dramatic tropes to drape over these preoccupations in a way that works. And, like, you know, the post-war culture in The Man Who Wasn't There is clearly what is driving them toward that. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. I think the Inside Llewyn Davis, the only reason it works is because they do have a pretty sincere approach to that character, even though he's like as unlikable as any Mickey Rourke character ever was.
You know, I haven't caught up to their most recent work. I haven't seen Hail Caesar, or was it the Ballad of...
Hail Caesar, just say no.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've heard
Hail
good things
no.
about the Ballad of...
Ballad of Buster Scruggs is, God, it's
No?
so good. No, it's so good.
Good,
It's
good.
so good.
Okay, good.
That's what Ballad of Buster Scruggs, you know, it's one of those things where it's just like, you guys just have endless ideas. Like, you know, what do your diaries look like? Because it's just like they're just so prolific, and they have so many, like, there's moments in that film where it's just like, you think you know what you're watching, and then all of a sudden they're just like, nope. And they do that so well. Yeah, they just see it.
I ultimately thought True Grit was a misfire. And I wasn't even a huge fan of the original True Grit, because I'm a huge John Wayne fan, and I just didn't think that could compete with a lot of John Wayne's best films. But I just felt like it was forced. It was like this attempt to do their own thing with it that I just didn't feel.
Bridges miscast,
you guys.
A misplaced remake. There's so many things wrong. Damon miscast, like everything.
It felt like a Burton move, honestly. Like, it felt like this, like, no, I'm gonna do it. Like, And it's not kind of Villeneuve is doing that, but in his own way, and it's having a kind of a polarizing results. And we'll see what happens with Dune. But it's that same kind of thing of like, let me see what I can put on this legacy.
Yeah, I mean, can you think of somebody who's taken seriously as like a great filmmaker of whatever stripe, whose films are that ridiculously hilarious? Like Catherine Bigelow's a great filmmaker. Her films are not funny. Denis Villeneuve is a great filmmaker. Yeah, what? They're not funny. So there's something about being able to inflect quality screen drama with that level of like, piss your pants, I want to go back and watch it again. Like, come over here, you got to see this. Like, you just don't see that often.
Well, we come back. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, bring it back to Do the Right Thing again with the humor, like with the ease of the tones. That actually, these are great. Those are great companion pieces, bookends of this approach to making a film like this.
So what impact did Fargo have in the? Did you track the way film culture was headed after that? Because ever since we saw whatever it was, Terminator 2 and Pulp Fiction, I think we were all like,
T2 changed me
for real,
as a
like,
human.
You were locked in after that. You were like, all right, what's next?
I thought anything was possible, and actually, just to give the Wachowskis some kudos, like Matrix did the same thing for me. I probably saw it 7 times in the theater and brought a different person every time who hadn't seen it and vicariously re-experienced it through them because it was like truly a memorable experience.
Fritz Lang would approve. Saying.
I feel like this was a good kind of, as I look back, like in 1996 when I did see it, it's like it was a good, like it was a nice like gateway drug of like, okay, I think I know what movies are and what movies I love. But oh my God, nothing has ever looked and felt like this. And then I just wanted to see, like it was immediately after that I was like, I gotta see Raising Arizona, and did. And then I just kept going down that rabbit hole. And like the first year at Burlington College, I can't remember if it was a specific a class or what, but I think it started with. No, it was Gangsters, and we watched Miller's Crossing.
Oh, nice. Woofter. What up, Woofter?
And we watched Miller's Crossing. And I remember just like, we all kind of watched it on our own, and then in that class, it's like, oh my God, the Danny Boy sequence when, it's just crazy. And then that's when Covino's like, you gotta watch Crime Wave. So we watched that, and then it just kept going, and I was just like, oh my God, Barton Fink, oh my God, this. Oh my God, I didn't know they did Hudsucker Proxy. So, yeah, I felt like it was just like this great gateway drug. And there's just so many great moments. What's the name of his stepfather's friend or lawyer?
Oh God, the only other character with any feeling of credibility is. Oh God,
I can't remember.
That was a nice, quietly realistic performance.
Stan Grossman.
Yes.
Oh my God! But it's so damn funny when his son is crying for his mother that's been kidnapped, and he's like,
Grossman's the only one who seems to care.
Well, no, he's just like, you got to call the cops, Dad, and he's like, oh no, we got to play this close to the vest. You ask Stan Grossman, he'll say the same thing.
God.
It's like.
He can't be a father even
to your kid.
Yeah.
It gets me every time.
Speaking of Miller's Crossing, someone calls someone a smart guy in this, and I couldn't help but hey, smart guy.
Well, Steve Buscemi in Hudsucker Proxy also refers to Tim Robbins as daddy a number of times. Ooh. So the whole whoa daddy.
Oh yeah, whoa daddy. Yeah. Like, Buscemi and McDormand get the best lines.
Pretty sure they're not aware of these resonances and that they're just kind of they find their way in, and we're probably we don't want to get all room 237 on this.
No,
anyway.
Dude, but when you see things that specific reappear, it's kind of part of the.
There are no typos in their scripts.
Right.
Are we square? Is there anything funnier than the way he's...
But it's all about isolation. And he's plugged me into the ozone when he's whacking on the TV, and the camera goes in.
I thought that was stuffing his foot into the wood chipper when you first started doing it.
It is, but that's definitely the we square part.
Yeah. No, I thought when you were doing that, that's what that was.
He's banging on the TV, and what does the camera go in on and become obsessed with for that one moment? Snow.
Yeah. Oh, I thought of White Snow. No, absolutely, man. When that happened, definitely. That was definitely something they.
So I mean, I really maybe was reaching when Ken Peck at Burlington College, the teacher of film music, was like, write an essay about some movie you like. And I was like, okay, Fargo. Fargo's awesome because it does everything with music that you basically can do. It performed all 9 functions of film scoring, according to that great article Ken handed out to us. And I was like, oh, it must be about social isolation. I was BSing my way through that as 18 years old, thought I was fancy. I really think that holds up. And I really think that isolation thing is there in all of his films. And there's an economic aspect to it, and there's a cultural aspect to it. And they can disavow the seriousness of their movies all they want, but the fact that Sam Raimi's attempt to follow up on Fargo, a simple plan, overtly foregrounded economic desperation, is the very reason it failed. So they're too canny to put what the movies are about on the face of them. And there's a class aspect in The Big Lebowski that is so there.
Well, how many times did they change the narrative of whether it was based on a true story or not? I mean, it went through multiple evolutions. It was this took place in Minnesota to just like, I guess the only thing true about it is that it's a story.
And when they got called out on it by the New York Post, this is in the little mini documentary, they issued like a statement. It's like, we don't know how this happened. We made a mistake.
Yeah.
Like we're going to get our PR department on this immediately.
William H. Macy is so funny because he's like, okay, so tell me about the real guy that it's based on. And they're like, oh no, it's not based on a real story. It's like, but the script says this is based on a true story. And they're like, yeah, we just wrote that. And he's like, you can't do that.
Right, but like that's a joke. Like that's the thing. Even a move like that is a built-in joke.
Only they would.
They are masters of seeing the joke. Because how many different people that were masters of comedy and timing in film actually had like a serious side? And they really
Billy
did.
Wilder.
Right. I mean, so
not too many other than that.
Right. But even like actors and performers, where like what informed their ability to be funny actually was sometimes a very dark place.
Robin Williams, sure.
So it's I think it's interesting that you do see that residue of meaning amidst that kind of hall of hilarity where it's like, oh man, they're like they may not want to admit it, but they are dealing with some serious stuff. And
I can't resist because I feel like we're probably wrapping up the show shortly or not, but because we associate Bill Macy with the characters that he's played, does that prevent us from feeling any empathy with him and his run-ins with the law? It's 2019. Bill Macy and his wife were just just for the audience, if everybody's not caught up, maybe you'll be seeing this a few years down the road. Bill Macy and his wife, along with a whole series of Hollywood pros, got caught basically paying their kids' way into USC and a few other schools. And because he's such a cad in many of his movies, I think we automatically, A, assumed he was guilty,
right,
and B, were unable to muster any empathy for him, because, I mean, who hasn't stepped outside the law in order to get their way once or twice? I mean, we all have, right? But we're like, oh, Bill Macy, up to your old tricks.
But the thing about this character is there a point? Is there a redemptive point in the film?
We never know what he's
like,
in trouble for.
I never see him make a decision that's not based on his own gratification. In the entire film,
even when he gets caught.
Like in not to reference Good Time again, but there's a scene in which Robert Pattinson, like where he has this character that you could see as socially irreverent, where like he does something of kindness and it's not forced, and it's just like it lets you know that
That's why
actually
he's a fine
there
actor.
is something going on that's
Yeah.
that's not what you see, and that's not connected to how the movie wants you to see this.
And no matter how puerile or moronic or unlikable Pattinson's characters are, he always brings that to every movie, and that's why we keep following him, because he brings it. Did we ever figure out what Bill Macy owes all the money for? Like, we never find out what the MacGuffin is. It's so
But that's
great.
so fun. I mean, that's actually. I think it's actually like a fun thing.
That's a sorry.
No, I'm done.
That's a Hitchcock thing. That's a MacGuffin, right? At the end of the movie, you don't even freaking care. Like, it's buried somewhere in the snow, and we don't know.
It's not about that.
Yeah.
There's more to life than a little bit of money.
That's right.
So, look, we already forgive you, Bill. should have done what the Coen Brothers would have done and just sent your kid to SDSU. No big deal. Why do you have to put on airs, man? I mean, you are shameless, dog. Just admit it. All will be forgiven, and we'll help you. We'll usher you into your golden years as an elder statesman of losers.
This did not disappoint. Thank you very much, Alex.
Yes, thank you.
It's my great
Pleasure
pleasure
to
to
be
be
back.
able to pour my love of movies into a place where I feel like it's heard and recognized. People really remarked on the quality of the show after I did The Shining. Like, people watch this show. People look forward to episodes of this show. And cinema will not die because we won't let it.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. We will be back next week. Is next week Wages
The
of Fear?
Wages of Fear. Cannot wait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you then. I'm David Metzger.
I'm Devon Ewalt.
Alex Lavin.